Want to have a short video and discussion about what ESG is because it's been in the news a lot. If you haven't been paying a whole lot of attention, there's been a lot going on in regards to Budweiser over the last 6 weeks, and now in this last week or so, Target has been added to it, and their company, their stock has taken a big hit, and there've been talks of boycotts. This isn't necessarily everything there is to know about ESG. But it is important to understand what ESG is, how it's actually affecting your investments, and why I've decided to go what I'm calling ESG neutral. So as we talk about this topic, there are some, it's a political topic, and there are some very important, we'll say very emotional topics and aspects of it. But please realize I'm not trying to stir up emotion. I'm trying to tell you how these things affect your investments. That's really what I'm going for. So first, let's define ESG. I think it's important if we're going to talk about ESG, we're going to define it and explain what it is. ESG investing has been around for probably about 15 years, really making it into the mainstream in the last 10 years. It's been used. It's been used a little bit more and more, but it's become very popular over the last 4 or 5 years. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. Now, before it was called ESG, it was just called social investing. So you would invest based on values, or maybe sometimes you would hear it as values-based investing. Now, I had a conversation probably about 4 years ago with a firm that does a lot of ESG investing. And one of the things that we talked about in the midst of that conversation is when you do values-based investing, it really depends on what your values are. And the example I used were two different companies that are on the far opposite ends of the social spectrum, and they're also on the far opposite ends of the political spectrum. You've got Progressive Insurance and Chick-fil-A. So Progressive Insurance is obviously very much on the liberal progressive side of things. Chick-fil-A, everyone knows where they stand, and they're on the very conservative side of things, both social and political. In both instances, they both are very heavily interested in saying this is what we believe. So when you talk about ESG or values-based investing, the question I said was, what does that really mean? Because for one person, values-based investing means I'm wanting to buy stock in Progressive. And another person, it may mean I'm going to buy stock in Chick-fil-A. So and Chick-fil-A is not a public company, so you really can't buy stock in Chick-fil-A, but it's the example I'm using. So just forgive me on that one, allow for a little creativity. But it really raises the question of which side of the spectrum are we really wanting to be on when we look for values-based investing. Over the years, though, that values-based investing concept switched into ESG, and ESG is environmental, social, and governance. When someone says they invest in ESG topics, what they're talking about is these three things, and it's almost always the left side of things. It's almost always the progressive side of things, not the Chick-fil-A side of things, is a good way to look at it. So when we talk environmental, the ESG scores, some companies, some ratings companies will give ESG scores. Those scores in the environmental category look at how much carbon do you produce as a company. They look at how well do you take care of the environment that is around you. Not necessarily bad things, but those are issues that have to be taken into account of what industry are you in. So companies like Exxon are going to score much lower on that than companies like Google. Google is striving to be a net zero carbon emission company. Okay, so they're looking in environmental, they're looking for that. When they talk about social, it's how well do you support social justice type issues? Like, did you fly the BLM flag or did you not? Do you support transgender and homosexuality or do you not? Again, progressive versus Chick-fil-A. We can kind of see how that all works out. And another aspect of social too, though, is that are you a union shop? Social side of the ESG also includes, are you unionized? So recently, as amazing as this sounds, one of the most E-oriented, we'll say E of the ESG-oriented companies, Tesla, was kicked out of a major index because their ESG score was too low, and it really hinged on the fact that they were non-union. So governance is the third part of it, and this is really where it affects you as an investor. Those first two things don't affect you as an investor as much, but we'll talk about how they have. But the governance side really affects you as an investor, because the governance side of ESG is the electing of board members. It's putting people in a position where they can make decisions and choose who is going to run the company. Well, the problem with ESG, the governance side of ESG, is a lot of times it means we're not selecting the best candidate. We're selecting the people who check the ESG boxes. So it could mean that we've got good candidates, but they're white men, so we're not going to hire them. We're going to hire this non-white, non-male person. It could be that they're hiring someone into a position that is an environmentalist, but the company that they're being brought in to be a board member of is an oil company. And this has happened. BlackRock has actually placed environmentalists on the board for gas companies, and that hurts profitability. As an investor, what you want is profitability. So we're going to use BlackRock, but BlackRock, Vanguard are both really big in this. Vanguard is actually saying they're pulling back a little bit from it, but we're going to use BlackRock as the example. And my clients own a lot of BlackRock funds. So BlackRock, I'm not bad mouthing them, but BlackRock, say you buy their S&P 500 index, you buy one of their funds, you give BlackRock money, and BlackRock goes and buys companies with it. Well, when you buy a stock from a company, one of the things that comes with that share, that partial ownership of the company, is your ability to vote for board members and directors and things like that. So what will happen is you will receive a proxy vote. And that proxy vote allows BlackRock to vote in your place. So think about it this way. The general election rolls around. It's time to vote for the presidency. You don't know who to vote for. You tell your neighbor, I'm going to let you vote proxy for me. You go and you vote for me. That's kind of what's going on, but BlackRock is doing it. Well, BlackRock in that voting process is voting specifically for these ESG principles. So when they vote for the ESG principles, they're not necessarily voting all the time for pure profit. They're voting for their political stance. And this has changed drastically over the years. And these companies have what is called a fiduciary responsibility to act in your best interest. You're giving them money. They have to act in your best interest, but they're not always doing it. Instead, they're acting in their political interests. So this has created a major problem in that these companies need to be held responsible to vote in a way that is going to allow you to make the most profit you can make in your investments. So I have decided I'm going to slowly move away from ESG-oriented investments and go towards what I'm calling ESG neutral. So if you remember, there was the Chick-fil-A and Progressive. Our goal isn't to swing away from the progressive stance and the policies of the left and swing into the policies of the right. Our goal in being ESG neutral is to just make good decisions based on the company. We're not going to vote based on social issues. All right, so we're no longer going to make a decision and make a stance. We're not going to invest in Bud Light just because Bud Light placed Dylan Mulvaney on their can. We're also not going to divest from Bud Light because they did that. We're going to look at how it affects their business, and then we're going to choose whether or not to invest or divest. Now, the company I'm using to do this is Strive Asset Management. Now, Strive Asset Management is a relatively new company, but they invest the same way that BlackRock does, and in terms of indexed, and then BlackRock's iShares, in terms of they do index, they have really low cost index, and they just do what the S&P 500 does. So they keep your costs extremely low. They don't take on any more risk than BlackRock. They do the exact same thing. But when it comes time to voting of proxies, they're not voting for conservative values or liberal values. They're voting for who's the best person and what's the best position for our company to take in terms of a stance. So I think it's really important that while ESG and values-based investing is a good concept and idea, we have to understand that really what we want from our investments is we want to have an ESG neutral stance. We don't necessarily want to swing in one way or the other. I don't think anyone really wants these multi-billion-dollar companies putting money into elections and determining the winner of elections. I think we don't really want them paying off our Congress to create policies. Instead, what we want them to do is make us money to have our funds grow so that we can then go and do those things that we want to do. So I'm going to be moving over to ESG neutral. I've already built the portfolios where I've pulled out the BlackRock funds because of the fact that they're doing this. I don't think it's good for investors, and put in the Strive Asset Management funds. I have some clients that I know are going to be interested in this, that are going to be the first wave. If you want to learn more about how ESG neutral looks versus ESG, and here's the thing about it, even if you're not in an ESG fund, if you have money with BlackRock or Vanguard, they're making these decisions for you. So if you decided, I want to invest via ESG principles, you can. You can still do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're just going out and you're saying, I want to own BlackRock's S&P 500 fund, then they shouldn't be voting ESG-based principles for your proxies. You should buy that you should buy the ESG version, and there is an ESG version. So it needs to be something that you know is going on, not something that's just going on behind your back. Strive Asset Management doesn't do that. If you have questions or you want to know more about how ESG works, you want to know what this idea of ESG neutral means, let me know. Reach out to me. If you're a client of mine, you're watching this, you're going to receive it in an email. But if you see it before I send it out to you, and you're questioning it and you want to know, let me know. Because if you want to get out of BlackRock and away from this ESG proxy voting, we can do that. If you don't care, we can keep you right where you're at. And at the end of the day, you're not going to see any difference in terms of returns, depending on which one you're in. But what you will do is you will see that one of them is voting for your best interests in terms of board members, and one of them is voting for their political policy in terms of board members. So reach out to me. Let me know how I can help you out. Answer any more questions for you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you enjoy your beautiful